Okay. I think it's fair to say that in spite of all the efforts of the central bank, quantitative easing, expansion of money base, uh, succeeded in massive increases in stock prices, but not inflation. Had there been some inflation, we would have been out of the recession much faster. I think Keynesian, this great recession that we've gone through, has also exposed the fact that Keynesian debt financing public policy is flawed strategy, flawed on many levels, political, Ricardian equivalents, multipliers, lingering debts, and whatever. The consequence of all that is that we've had now a recession that lasted for 8 years, massive unemployment, total GNP loss in the US exceeds $8 trillion. And we're still in it. The zero low bound is still there, still facing deflationary forces. In my view, this is time for rethinking of how stabilization policy should be achieved in case of deep recessions. I'm talking about deep recessions now. I have no argument against conventional monetary policy. And I will make the case that the only alternative is to have much more drastic intervention in private markets, and particularly to make the wage rate the center for policy for stabilization. One of the reasons for it is the policy has to be simple, it has to be clear, it has to be popular, and it has to be activated by an executive without the boiling forces of interest groups in the Congress, so that the public can understand and support it. There's some precedent to the idea. I don't think it's a completely new idea. If you go back to NRA 1933, whether right or wrong, I'm not judging here, I'm not discussing here the success of either Nixon or FDR. FDR wanted to raise wages. He wanted to raise wages and prices. NRA was based on the idea of introducing minimum wage that, despite the opposition of the Supreme Court, went in 1938. It introduced substantial legislation for unionization and active pushing of wages. In fact, FDR actually sought increased wages by private corporations, and 2,000 corporations actually responded by raising wages. Obviously, we have substantial experience with emergency use of intervention in private markets. Now, the work that I will present will be based on 3 pieces. One will be the standard ZLB model, zero low bound models, of the new Keynesian models. I will introduce the notion of an integrated model. I'll explain in a second. The inflexible wages that will create the unemployment in the model will be based on staggered wages theory of Taylor and Fisher, together with some empirical adjustment in the model based on the empirical work of the 1970s on the effect of inflation and unemployment. And disaggregation of diverse beliefs, which is my own theory, but the diverse belief component is only used here to generate volatility. I will develop the model on the general case, but conduct the experiments, the policy experiments under rational expectations. Okay, so the standard model of production with labor only, utility of consumption, labor effort, money, cashless economy, central bank will choose the nominal rate and provide as much money as necessary. I will introduce demand shocks to the discount rate, mostly to generate the deflation. The as anybody or everybody else has done the same thing. Therefore, there will be two shocks in the model, technology shock and demand shock. Just the notation-wise, R is the deviation of the nominal rate from the steady state. Therefore, when the nominal rate is 0, R hat is -1 minus beta. So you write down the Euler equations, do the log linearization, you get the IS curve, labor supply, you get the optimal Phillips curve individualized because it's a heterogeneous model, marginal cost, demand for bonds, market clearing conditions. And the unemployment will be the involuntary unemployment will be the component, which is the supply minus demand. The parameter values I will use in all calculations will be completely standard except for two. I'm going to use half of the size of the technology shock, and that will be the role of diverse beliefs in generating volatility. Otherwise, the only deviation will be the integrated model I'm explaining now, and the fact that I will discuss the degree of price stickiness in the new Keynesian model. That will be a very important question I'll have to address. Diverse beliefs appears in the form of GI being the index of Mr. I's belief, Z is the average. I will be interested in volatility if I have time to talk about the ratio of the standard deviation of the wage to output and the standard deviation of employment to output, because a model with flexible wages generate far more flexibility of volatility of the wage rate than should be in the data. So what is an integrated model? The model, although it's a new Keynesian model, the economy with a positive interest rate and the economy with a zero interest rate are two sub-economies. The economy is transiting among them with the transition matrix described in this manner. Obviously, there is a force that causes the transition. So there is some function, which I will generate through the shocks myself, that transits the economy from one to the other. So it's not just a random shock, which is chosen arbitrarily, but it's based on the fact that the zero lower bound is very rare. Therefore, I will choose in the calculation this to be 0.9976, which means a recession, a depression, so a zero lower bound, once in every 280 quarters. With omega L being 0.96, it's the duration, mean duration will be 25, which is about based on surveys. Now, the actual rule, therefore, it's very important to understand, is the nominal rate depends in the positive interest rate. It will be equal to this function, which is the Taylor rule, in the what I call the upper sub-economy. The upper sub-economy, when the shock does not occur and the actual interest rate is positive. And it will be equal to R hat will be -1 minus beta when the shock occurs and the interest rate in the upper economy is negative. Notice the conditions in the lower economy don't matter. What matters are the conditions only in the upper economy, i.e. the economy without the shock and without policy. Expectations in this model are therefore constructed always depending upon the state where you are. If you are in the upper economy, in the upper sub-economy, you take into account what will happen to me if you go down. And if you're in the lower economy, you know perfectly well there will be some probability that it will be out, and that will affect your decisions and affect your behavior, okay? Labor markets, there will be a 5% surge unemployment built in, involuntary unemployment, therefore it will be U, which is equal to L hat minus N hat. Let me explain to you the influx. Yes?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
I'm sorry?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Quick. Go ahead.
The transition matrix which you presented,
Yeah.
it's for which primitive shock?
I'm sorry?
This is the transition matrix of which shock?
This is the shock that causes the economy to go, This is the unknown shock to you, just a general function that I'm telling you, it's right here, defined here. You see that? There's a shock here, and that's the shock that causes it to go one way or the other.
It's a shock to what?
It's a function, it's unknown function, it's not specified yet. I'll specify later in the calculations, okay? Okay, so the wages, the mean wage can consist of the wage of regular employees, whose wage is determined by a staggered wage structure, in which the wage rate of regular employees is the expected wage of those workers that will be in a competitive economy. So this is the wage of the competitive economy, and this is the expected wage that would have prevailed in the competitive economy. Evidence shows that this wage is basically inflexible. It is basically based on productivity, and therefore in this model, it is exactly equal to this number, which is a weighted average of future productivities. Notice you're averaging here into the future. The mean regular wage is actually a mean of those whose job offer. I'm sorry. I'm going to assume that the wage offers are distributed equally, uniformly across the space. As a result of that, at any date t, there's people who are given an offer t-1 and t-2, t-3, and t-4, and therefore you're now averaging over the past. So the actual wage rate, W star, which is the mean wage rate of regular employees, is therefore an average over past 4 and future 4. It is equal to this exact function. Two adjustments to the wage rate. One, which is a result of the fact that the wage of irregular employees, these are part-time, temporary, and most important are entry-level wages. These are flexible, these are much more flexible, they respond much more to the unemployment rate, and the empirical evidence shows that their flexibility is approximately measured by resulting in the fact that the mean wage response to the unemployment to unemployment is about 0.15. This is a reasonable estimate of that. So the mean wage in the economy is the average of the wage of regular and irregular employees when you do the log linearization and take all the pieces together, you come out with a wage function in which the mean wage, and therefore is equal to the reference wage that I gave before, which is this one here, and adjusted by inflation, which is the empirical evidence shows that the reaction of the wage rate to inflation comes with a delay about 1 period, which means the lambda pi is estimated to be about 0.6, and lambda u, which is the response to unemployment, of the mean wage to unemployment, is about 0.15. This is based on empirical studies, so that it's a combination of theoretical work together with empirical work. I don't think that there's any other sensible way to construct an understanding how the wage of the labor market works. Anyway, this is going to be the wage function I'm going to be using. Notice that in this function, these 4 variables become the state variables. Zeta t-1, zeta t-2, t-3, t-4. You should think about these as just 4 state variables. And then the nature of their transition is that the 4th one moves into the 3rd one moves into the second transits into the 1st, and the 1st one transits into zeta. So you've got a structure here of 4 state variables, and it's this basis that enables the policy to change the wage rate. In other words, these are state variables in the economy. These are variables that move slowly. As a result of that, the policymaker can alter them and tell the market, you should calculate the wage by altering these numbers in your base calculations. Okay. Based on what I've now said so far, okay, I moved very well. Maybe I'm moving fast, but it's okay. I can now compute, so given the pieces that I have put together, I can now compute the entire equilibrium, and I'm going to discuss from now on mostly this is the equilibrium for under rational expectations. And again, notice that I'm making the distinction here between the upper sub-economy and the lower sub-economy. The most important thing to observe are these. If you look at the upper sub-economy, it's a perfectly normal economy. If you look at the effect of productivity, it increases consumption, it increases output, it decreases inflation, it increases the wage rate, increases profits. Everything normal. If you increase the wage, notice zeta t minus 1, t minus 2, t minus 3, these are the indices, these are the state variables that define the real wage. If you increase the wage in the upper economy, you reduce consumption, you reduce output, you increase inflation, you increase the wage, equilibrium wage, and you increase unemployment. This is unemployment. And you decrease profit. So this economy works perfectly normal. But look what happened in this economy. If you increase the wage rate in this economy, consumption increases, output increases, inflation increases, the equilibrium wage increases, unemployment actually declines, profits obviously decline. There's another peculiarity in this economy, and that is this economy has a constant, which means that basically what happens is that, if I have this, although we have two sub-economies in the space, although we have two sub-economies in a space with two steady states, the steady state of this economy is in the middle. The economy is actually, the integrated economy is fluctuating in the middle. It's not close to either one of those steady states. And so that at the moment it switches into the lower sub-economy, you immediately have a small crash in output and consumption, and obviously you have the deflationary force, which is 1% per quarter, and it's 4% annually. That's a very heavy deflationary force. Okay, if you simulate this economy together with all the shocks and all of the volatility, and including the diverse belief component, you get one interesting thing to notice, and this is the interest in the simulation part of the work. The US data shows that the wage rate fluctuates compared to output at a rate of 0.38. Employment and output pretty much fluctuate together, which means that fluctuations in output are very much caused by fluctuations in employment. If you run the model with completely flexible wage, you'll find that the wage rate is far more volatile than output. But if you run it with a model I postulated, you'll get these results. So at least the model generates the correct relationships in the volatility of wages to output and employment. So what is a stabilizing wage policy? Stabilizing wage policy is a policy in which the government announces a change in the wage rate. The change occurs, the letter that I'm using is a Hebrew letter for sin. Sin stands for sahara, which means wage. So this is a change in the wage, percentage-wise, for one period. But the policy is changed together with the provision that cost of living adjustment is made fully at the end of the quarter. As a result of that, the real value of the change is maintained. As a result of that, if you make additionals, you make changes one quarter after the other, the effect is the cumulative effect. So the hat is the actual increase in the base wage. Notice the percentage that I'm calculating here is the percentage compared to zeta. But then it gets translated so that for example, a 10% increase of that results in about 6% rise in the real wage. Yeah.
Can you just say something about the mechanism? Is it the same as Goitier-Gibson's payroll tax?
There is a way. I'm sorry?
Is it running through, I mean, the fact that we raise marginal cost expectations, inflation rises, inflation expectations rise, so real interest rates fall, is that?
Yes, this will exactly, this is a mechanism
Think about
that,
it the same way.
I'm sorry?
I should think about it in that way.
You think about that exactly as a way of increasing. I don't want you to think about taxes because I want it to be executed. I want to be executed by an executive, and I want to be executed through the price system. But I want to be I want to be an increase in the wage to cause an increase in the cost, and it aligns the interests of the private sector with the policy. The policy's aim is to generate inflation. And if you raise marginal cost, firms have an interest in raising marginal cost, in raising prices. Therefore, inflation becomes an interest of the firms. Inflation generates the additional demand and causes the deleveraging. Deleveraging, change in demand, this is the mechanism we're talking about. Now, the requirement is that firms cannot lower their wage to adjust for the change in policy, and this is easily detectable if any violation, because changes in zeta that result in change in marginal cost, in marginal productivity, are in the order of magnitude of 0.0045 standard deviation, whereas we are now talking about changes of 5 to 10%. Termination, the policy termination, then cost of living adjustment stops, then 1/4 of the firms adjust their wages according to the new offers they make. Therefore, 1/4 after the other, the firms abandon the policy. Now, this is important. I'm going to use the term standard active policy for a policy in which I raise the base by 10% immediately and maintain it until termination. No further increases at the end. Now, obviously, a new Keynesian theory is all about adjustment speed. This is the difference between a new Keynesian model and a Walrasian model. The issue is the relative speed by which things change. So the key element here is the response of prices to the policy. Now, the origin of the new Keynesian theory was the menu cost. The idea is that small change in cost result in slow change in prices. But here, we are dealing with big changes of cost, 5%, 10% change in a wage rate. How soon should firm react? That's a big question, and it matters a hell of a lot. So let me show you what the issue is. If omega is equal to 0 and wage increases by 10%, firms react immediately. With omega 0.2, they react within 3/4 of a month. But with omega equal to 2/3, they take 6 months to react. I think 6 months is too long. I think that the 0 is too short. I think there's monopolistic competition that causes some adjustment. It takes some time. And I would imagine that something like somewhere in this area between 0.3 and 0.5 is reasonable in terms. I'm not suggesting that other mechanisms would cause prices to change slower. But in response to big changes in wages, you would expect a little bit faster than 6 months and a little bit slower than 0. Most of my calculations are made by omega being between 0.3 and 0.5. I've calculated them mostly for 0.4. And I want you to see that it matters, because if you compute the elasticity, the total reduced form elasticity of output, for example, with respect to wage increase, this elasticity is 1.8 here, but it's 0.34 here. So it makes a big difference what it is. From the point of view of the policy, it doesn't matter what omega it is. The omega decides what is the intensity of the policy that you choose. I chose this 10%, but it could be 20% or 2%. And that policy must be adjusted to the omega which is relevant. I don't know what is the correct omega. I wish I did. And to some extent, future research will have to put some more light on the subject. Okay, one last point. The policy has no redistribution effect in this model because the households own the firms. Therefore, any change in profits, any change in wages makes completely balance itself out. So if you increase wages and you reduce profits, you have no effect on the budget of the households. As a result of that, all redistribution effects have to be calculated outside of the model. Now, the shock itself, this is the answer to your question. This C that I'm talking about will be in the form of a sequence of unexpected shocks to demand, and those shocks will have to be on a specified level to maintain the economy under the ZLB. And then comes a point at which the decision is made to stop it, and then there's a transition back to the upper economy. To see how the path, so I'm going to simulate it now in two ways. I'll tell you in a second what deleveraging rules are used for discontinuation of the recession, so to speak. But I want to show you how the simulation goes for the reference economy, and to point out that I am going to turn off all shocks except for the demand shock in one case, and then I will turn on all the shocks together, and you'll see why I'm choosing the first one. So this is the pattern of, I'm sorry, this is very small, you cannot see very much, but output settles at about minus 9% depression. There's about, 6%, and this is about 9% a deflationary force. Unemployment settles at about 12%. The duration of this deflation it's spontaneous, is 44 quarters. And you can see a sharp decrease in profits, which then settles down and then comes back when it ends. If you turn on all the shocks, you can see that the simple pattern that you observe there is not seen any longer. It becomes a bit more mixed up. So all the calculations that I will show you those that you have to think about them as if they are the expected value, the mean value when you average over all other shocks. So now what's left is to explain the deleveraging conditions which are underlying the model. The Great Recession brought about a $7.2 trillion loss of wealth in the United States. Some of that was restored, but most estimates are that about $3.3 trillion has not been recovered yet. In other words, this is deleveraging that is yet to be made in order to recover, to exit the ZLB. So that means that since 2007, GDP was about $14 trillion. This means that about 24%, I'm using Y bar, which is the reference GDP for 2007, as the objective of deleveraging. So how is deleveraging being done in the model? There are two ways. Number one, there is a direct deleveraging, which is savings, debt reduction, renegotiations, mortgage default, foreclosures, whatever other methods by which debts are being removed. And this is assumed to be at the rate of 1.75% per quarter. But in addition to that, we have two other methods of deleveraging, which is just inflation, which is the key element. And there are two components there, depending upon the kind of debts we have. You've got fixed debts, which are fixed interest rates, and variable debts. The model, the paper lays out the dynamics of those two debts and shows how different inflations affects. And obviously, there's this Fisher debt deleveraging, debt deflation mechanism is extremely important here. As a consequence of all that, the termination rule is this. The interest rate requires to be positive, which means in the upper economy, upper sub-economy, this is condition holds without the shock, and the total deleveraging is achieving to be about 0.76. Total debt is reduced to 0.76 of Y bar, which is the 0.24 subtraction, because I said Y bar was equal. All right, this is the correct proportion of the debt reduction necessary to achieve what I wanted. Okay, so now I'm going to discuss.
Mordecai?
Yes.
if it's not a distraction, could you show where that debt was determined in your, you've got a way of determining that D sub T, under number 2?
The equations are in the paper. In the paper, I work out a model.
So that's an endogenous object. That's enough of an answer.
I'm sorry?
So,
Yes, it's calculated in the model.
got
Okay.
it, got it.
Mordecai, just so you know.
So, first of all, we look at the first case of active policy at the rate of 10% of the base and with no further increases afterwards. So it's a big increase in wages at the very beginning. Notice that it causes the equilibrium wage, when everything takes into account, to rise about 5%, 5.5%. Notice that output is shocked down to minus 10%, but this is the pattern of output without policy. It takes 44 quarters to recover, and it's stuck about, I think it's about, I can't read it myself, I think it's about 5%, minus 5% deflation gap. Then the inflation rate down here is about 9%, 10% deflation rate. And under the policy, you have an immediate rise in output. It settles at about minus 2%. And then you've got these 4 periods at the end. These 4 disks at the end are the exit period. I told you that they come out 1 period at a time. So you've got these 4 periods going out. You have to add to this the redistributional component because of the difference in marginal propensity to consume of wealthier people compared to lower income people. The difference being justifies, I calculated in the paper that a redistribution of that sort during the deflation would have contributed about 1 to 1.25% to GDP. That would have been, you have to raise this by about 1 to 1.25%. The result of that is that under the policy, the deflation ends in 9 quarters, and without policy, it took 44. The inflation rate under the policy goes to about 6%. But 6%, and without policy, it's 8% deflation rate. The 6% goes on for 9 quarters plus the transition period, which means you've got 6% inflation that lasts for about 2.5 years, 3 years. Unemployment rate falls down under the policy to about 6% at termination, and then it disappears, goes into 0. Notice in the case of profits, you've got a choice here. Firms had to choose between sustained periods of losses of 44 quarters against sharper losses at the beginning and quick recovery afterwards. In this case, the present value of this is virtually 0 in this particular case. Well, one may argue that 6% inflation for 3 years is too much, and there will be political resistance to that, and that's conceivable, and they're not judging that. So here's a policy when we are reducing the intensity to 6%. So this is low intensity, in which the equilibrium real wage then rises only by about 3%. The inflation rate actually is 0. Unemployment goes down much, much slower, and at termination, it's still at 10%, but then it falls rather rapidly afterwards. And output goes from about minus 10% to about 4%, and then gradually goes back to 0. So the length of time it takes for achieving exit from the ZLB under this more moderate policy is 11 quarters compared to 44 without policy. Obviously, it takes longer. Unemployment is longer, and the damage of the deflation is still longer. Yes, I know time is getting short. So let me quickly go into this policy. This is the policy in which you add 1% each period. So you can see inflation is creeping up slowly, period by period, because you keep pushing the wage up. Output gets slowly improved. Unemployment gradually going down. Profits are gradually going down, so it's a slowing process, but at the end, you end up with almost 8% inflation at the end, and it takes you 11 quarters to terminate. So again, this achieves the purpose, but at the end, if you wait too long, if you keep pushing, then in fact, at the end, you cause more damage than not moving fast at the end. Let me just finish, and because I'm skipping to I don't have time anyway, I'm out of time, so let me just get to my final comments, and then we can ask the questions. So, in chapter 19, Keynes gives a whole lot of reasons why wage flexibility and lowering the wage is a bad idea. It won't work. And gives 7 long reasons. And he has a long appendix against Pigou on why Pigou is wrong in demanding wage flexibility. But if you took each one of these reasons carefully and reversed it, the same reason why wage should not go down would have provided a very good reason why the wage should go up. And the policy is effective for the 2 reasons. Number one, it aligns the interest of the firms with the interest of the policymaker. We want to generate some inflation. Inflation will generate a negative, a reduced real rate. In reducing the real rate, it will generate additional demand. It will cause the deleveraging to be expedited. If you add the redistribution effect, you have to add 1 to 1.25% to all my calculations. The policy requires no public investments, no public spending, and no lingering effect. The policy also prevents the sharp deterioration in income inequality that resulted from the Great Depression. And finally, if you take my numbers seriously, what this suggests to you is that if in September of 2008, the US would have instituted that policy at the level of, say, 5.5% of the real wage, which is about 10% of the base, we would have been out of the ZLB in 9 to 11 quarters, and full employment would have been reached by 2011, 2012. Thank you.